Emotions chart the landscape of life, the highs, the lows, and the periods in between.
Emotions have often been understood as feelings. We feel happy, sad, fear, anger, disgust. You can say those words. Everybody knows what they mean. We can all form facial expressions that are unique and distinct that convey each of those.
We're always sort of monitoring our body and trying to make sense of what it's feeling. Well, my God, my heart's beating, my muscles and my neck are really tense, my face is kind of contracted. This really feels kind of like anger.
A new view of emotion treats them as almost like social sensory systems or social phenomena that help us form attachments and get along with friends and negotiate social hierarchies and fall in love. And so I really see where emotions come from as our basic system to help us create cooperative social communities.
British naturalist Charles Darwin extended this view of emotions to other species.
His real interest in writing that book, The Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals in 1872, was to show that humans have the same kinds of expressions of even the most noble sentiments like crying or compassion that other species do. And that fit his view of evolution.
Fear is a really cross-species emotion, which is very basic and fundamental. Other emotions we think are probably distinctly social and maybe distinctly human, like shame, guilt, and embarrassment. Mark Twain said, man is the only animal that feels shame and embarrassment, and the only one that should. So something in cognitive and higher order is going on in forming those types of social emotions. Fear is the opposite end, perhaps, of the continuum, something incredibly basic, from a cockroach to a house cat to a monkey to a human who hears a thunderclap in the middle of the night. The same circuitry is probably being used there.
What characteristics distinguish emotions from other states?
Well, one of the first characteristics of an emotion is that it's unbidden. We don't choose to have an emotion. We don't say, all right, now I'm going to be happy. Or how about a little bit of fear? The second is that what sets off our emotions is influenced both by our phylogeny and our ontogeny.
As William James pointed out, it's impossible virtually to separate emotions from instincts. They're inextricably woven together, and it's evolved as a hardwired system because of its high survival value.
But also our ontogeny, what happened in the course of growing up. And so my wife is afraid of mice. I'm not afraid of mice. Okay? She cried when Princess Diana died. I couldn't have cared less. So we are both the same in terms of our evolutionary heritage, enormously different in terms of how we've grown up. Third thing is, so emotions are triggered without our being able to witness that process or really influence it very much. You may be anticipating being abandoned by a male figure because that was a crucial and traumatic part of your childhood, and you keep writing that script into present situations. Once you learn about that, you can, to some extent, prepare yourself to not have that trigger operate so automatically.
When you think about it, you go into a courtroom and the first thing the judge says is, I want you to put aside your emotions and think about the evidence here. And that may not only be unrealistic, but it may be inappropriate.
A fourth is that there's a signal. Emotions aren't private. There's a signal in our face that informs other members of our species as to what's going on, not why. Emotions don't tell us their cause.
Who is not afraid?
Emotional experiences over time become mood. So I'm angry because you have just kept me from doing something I want to do, but later in the day I'm just in a crabby mood. Emotion is the mountain, and mood is the scree at the bottom of the mountain, all that little rubble that rolls off the mountain.
And over the history of our species, it has been useful for us, for others to know how we feel.
In fact, emotions themselves have proved to be important survival mechanisms.
At the very basic level, what emotions do is they prepare us for action. In our evolutionary history, there were a number of problems that humans faced again and again. Things like defending what was theirs, avoiding danger. And all of these kinds of behaviors place pretty strong demands on physiology. So you don't want to go to a fight without your heart pumping. And this is sort of what evolution has done. It's provided us with these sort of simple solutions that give us just exactly the support we need to take care of that problem most of the time.
Through the years, several issues have spurred controversy among emotion researchers, including one very basic question. Which comes first, the physiological arousal or the emotional experience?
And the autonomic nervous system is pretty fast. So, for example, your heart rate can almost double within a beat. So within a second, you go from having a very slow, calm heart to having a pumping heart that's producing all the blood you might need to move quickly. On the other hand, there are certain things that are going to kick in much more slowly and last longer. And that's when the things like the hormone system get involved.
But in return to the near-miss car accident, if you survive that accident, in some sense the emotion is over. But the autonomic changes will take about 10 seconds to flatten out and return to baseline. So are you still in the emotion? Or are you just in the physical? Well, it depends how you want to define it. Certainly in the autonomic signature, it's still running. It hasn't stopped. But there's no longer anything to deal with.
We can look at the relationship between certain physiological processes that we would identify as emotional versus how we think about it. The James Lang theory of emotion seems to work alongside Schachter and Singer and Cannon and Bard, all coming from different standpoints. Still, the brain and the body work together.
And therein lies another issue that captivates researchers, the relationship between thinking and emotion.
It's really is a dichotomy that traces its roots back to classical philosophers who talked about passion and reason and the interplay between the two.
And it's not as if that debate has been reconciled, but my sense is that most emotion researchers would agree that there's a two-way street potential there, that clearly cognitions can elicit emotion and emotions can shape cognition. That's a given. The arguable point is whether cognitions are required for emotion. And I think then it becomes kind of a semantic issue.
Emotions aren't devoid of thought and cognition. And in fact, what we're starting to figure out is that brief emotions really have their own very specific functional forms of cognition. When you're in an anxiety state, it does a lot of important cognitive work by looking for threat in your environment. Emotions are, as Jean-Paul Sartre argued, specific ways of perceiving aspects of the world.
Emotional experience can be measured along several dimensions.
And it tends to be a two-dimensional space. It goes from good to bad and low arousal to high arousal. There's an animal on the savannah with a water hole nearby, and the animal's thirsty. Predators are also near the water hole because they know that prey go to the water hole to quench their thirst. If I only feel good or bad, then I have a strong sense of either moving toward or away. If I can activate both of those at the same time, now I have kind of an interesting organism.
So the animal tentatively approaches the water hole, aware of the danger, but too thirsty to ignore the possibility of something to drink. At the same time, he's on high alert.
Notice they have maximized kind of attention and energy while also slowly dipping down for a little bit of water. So as that croc starts to rise and grab, they're better able to escape. That flexibility is much more powerful for evolutionary purposes.
The two parts of the profile that I've explored is the speed of our response. How quickly do we become emotional? And how strong are our emotional responses? If you look at either the facial muscles or the physiology, those are fairly constant across emotions. So if you're a fast responder in anger, you'll be a fast responder in fear. If you're a moderate responder in anger, you'll be a moderate responder in fear. But these two features of your profile are independent. You can be a fast moderate or you can be a slow strong. Now, those aren't the only features of our profile. How long does it last? Duration. What's the decay period like? Abrupt, or does it stretch out over time? And then what are the hot triggers?
If we are aware of the dimensions of our emotional profile, is it possible to regulate our emotions?
And there's two issues. One is, do I want to be emotional or not? Is that really a coiled rope, not a snake? Did he really mean to insult me? Or am I misinterpreting that? Am I running that damn insult script again and it doesn't apply here? That's the choice about being emotional. That's the hardest thing to achieve, but for some people it'll be easier to achieve because nature gave them more of a gap between impulse and action. It's longer gradual onset time. The other is, once I'm being emotional, how long do I want to do this and how do I want to do it?
When we try to predict our emotional reaction in a given situation, we often miss the mark.
One of the reasons we overestimate the intensity and duration of our negative emotions, our sadness, our frustration, our anger, is that we don't recognize that we're extremely good rationalizers. Every human being has what we might call a psychological immune system, a system of cognitive mechanisms that are designed to help them think about the world in a new way so that they can feel better about it. So if your wife leaves you, you do find yourself searching for new ways to look at your life that will make you feel a little bit better. But if you break your pencil, it's very unlikely you're going to rationalize, I didn't like that pencil anyway. The lead was soft. Somebody must have rigged it, right? The fact that we tend to rationalize more with big events than little events can have a paradoxical consequence. Namely, that little events can make us feel a little bit bad, but they can make us feel a little bit bad for a really long time because we tend not to rationalize them. So, for example, if you were to tell me that you were interviewing 100 psychologists for this show and I was person 101, but somebody got sick, so I got on the list, I'd be very insulted by that. But I'd quickly decide he's kidding me, or, well, of course, there are a lot of very old people without my charm and good looks who must have gotten in line ahead of me. I'd find a way to reframe that event. But if you told me that one of my good friends had been person 101 on your list, I'd feel a little bad about that, but not bad enough to rationalize. What that means is that the little insult can last longer than the big one. We call this the peculiar longevity of things not so bad.
When two different emotions are similar in intensity and about the same on the negative-positive scale, is there a difference in the way our body reacts?
For a long time, I think, researchers believed that the different emotions didn't have distinctive physiologies. But there's been more recent research in the last 5-10 years that really suggests the possibility that they do have distinctive physiologies.
And in my collaborations with Bob Levinson, we were able, to our satisfaction in 4 published studies, establish different patterns of changes in heart rate, skin conductance, skin temperature, for fear, anger, sadness, and disgust.
The question of where emotions reside in the brain is one of the most exciting questions in the study of neuroscience. What we're starting to learn is that there are certain parts of the brain, like the amygdala, that really seems to be involved in perceiving emotional faces. It's involved in the emotional property of stimuli. There are other parts of the brain, like the anterior cingulate, that also seem to be involved in pleasure and positive experience and emotion. Another part of the brain that's become very of interest to psychologists and neuroscientists is the orbital frontal cortex. And that is a little part of the cortex that resides right behind your eyes. And there are different theories about this, but what people tend to believe is that that part of the brain helps us get these emotional signals from the amygdala and figure out what to do about them.
The cortex's job is to sort of rein in the emotions, like the platonic charioteer that sort of tugs on the appetite to hold them back and lets reason take over. And in fact, we know from patients with damage in the front of the brain, the famous one is Phineas Gage, who had a steel rod shot through the front of his head. And there are lots of modern patients with brain damage from encephalitis and strokes and things with damage in the cortex, that they often make poor life decisions.
Can we not do this right now?
Do men and women express emotion differently, as rumor would have it?
In nonverbal communication skill, women tend to be more emotionally expressive than men, and they tend to be more emotionally sensitive, so they're better emotional communicators in that sense. They're better able to portray emotions, they're better able to decode or to detect emotions.
The studies that have been conducted on that present people with different kinds of emotional stimuli, like facial expression. And in general, women tend to be slightly more accurate judges of emotion, but the differences are not that great. In one survey of the literature, say out of 100 points, a woman would score 78 and a man 76. There are differences, but it's not robust.
Men are better at regulating their emotions. And if you think back to sort of traditional stereotypic ways of raising boys and girls.
Listen to the baby. You're like a little girl.
You know, boys are taught to control their emotions, stop crying, take it like a man, that kind of thing. And women are taught to be more expressive in their emotion.
And is expressing love, sadness, and a lot of other emotions, more fear, for example, anxiety, more than men. Men are allowed only a narrow range of options for emotions that are appropriate for men. Anger and pride are the two big ones for men. So it's okay for men to express anger. It's not okay for women to express anger. That's the forbidden emotion for women.
I said shut up!
Across cultures, researchers often find similarities in the ways emotion is expressed.
Darwin thought that emotions serve these important functions and they should be universal. And that view languished for some time until somebody named Paul Ekman came along in the late 60s and really started a whole research tradition. So what we do is we take photographs of people expressing emotion to people in radically different cultures, and you see whether they interpret them in the same way that we do.
And there are still some holdouts who think emotions are a Western fiction, just invented by the West to explain their behavior and don't exist in other cultures. They have a hard time dealing with some of the findings, particularly on the universality of expression, and that anywhere in the world, if you show people 3 pictures of anger, disgust, and a fear picture, and you say someone's about to fight, they'll point to the anger picture. And it doesn't matter what their culture or language is, and that's because of the universality and the basicness of anger.
But there is also a social component, and I participated in an extensive research that one of Ekman's students, Jerry Boucher, did, in which he asked people in 12 different countries to tell stories that had to do with a particular emotion. And what you found is that in all the cultures, there were these 6 basic emotions, but the kinds of situations that would elicit anger in Malaysia were different than the kinds of situations that would elicit anger in Puerto Rico. So when it comes to emotions, I think that the physiology is just the background on which the social behavior gets demonstrated.
Researchers also found cultural differences in the unwritten rules about the display of emotions we feel.
We've been fascinated with 2 kinds of cultures. Cultures that believe that emotions need to be hidden and moderated, and cultures that believe that emotions should be expressed and shared. And so we've done a series of studies trying to understand at what level these cultural beliefs translate into differences in the emotion system. It's not a simple answer, but in general, our finding has been that cultures influence the way we talk about our emotions, the way we label our emotions, and our beliefs about what makes for a good emotional life. They don't have much effect on the way our faces express emotion, and they have essentially no effect on the way our bodies respond in emotion.
Expressions not only reflect or communicate emotion, they can also intensify the feelings that accompany them.
There's a theory called facial feedback theory of emotion. So when you make your face so that you are smiling, for example, or you are frowning, the theory goes that you experience corresponding emotions.
If you made a fearful face, if somehow you could create the fear physiology in your body, you would probably begin to be afraid. These are systems that are so critical for our survival that nature has given us lots of ways of turning them on.
As the study of emotion has expanded, some researchers are exploring not just the basic emotions, but beyond.
The fact that in terms of basic emotions, that the facial signature is there, that there's a cross-cultural similarity, that there's kind of an early analog in animals of most of these emotions are some of the ways that we define what a basic emotion is. But emotions like love, there's a lot of other emotions that don't meet those criteria for being basic, yet are fundamental to our human experience and are very important in terms of our scientific studies.
To look briefly at anger, an emotion that is clearly included on everyone's basic list.
Anger is associated with higher skin temperature. So you're hotter physiologically when you're angry, just like you experience. And it's different than if you feel sad or if you feel afraid.
It's not only critical that we know how to get angry, but it's also critical that we don't get too angry in certain situations. What might have worked very well when we were dealing with predators doesn't work very well when we're dealing with loved ones and people who might make decisions about our promotions and our careers. So humans have this kind of uniquely evolved capacity to fine-tune emotions.
Constructive anger is anger that's directed at the action that is interfering with you and not at the actor. Your intent is to stop the person from acting in a way that's causing you a problem, but not to hurt that person. In fact, just the opposite. To try to understand why they're interfering with you and seeing whether you can help them find a way they can achieve their goal without preventing you from achieving your goal. That's a very tall order.
On the flip side of anger studies is the emerging research regarding forgiveness.
So let's start with what forgiveness is not, because it's essential to distinguish it from lookalikes or from second cousins. And so among those things that forgiveness is not are condoning, tolerating, minimizing, excusing. Forgiveness doesn't mean you like the person. Similarly, forgiving doesn't necessarily mean reconciling with the offender. We have to hold someone accountable, honestly, for having hurt us. And we have to honestly take an account of the negative implications of this act or set of acts. What's interesting is what happens when people focus on past hurts, when they ruminate about them, when they harbor grudges against the people who have hurt them, compared to what happens when they're trying to grant forgiveness, which is shifting one's emotions in a more positive direction.
Research subjects are asked to think about a situation in which someone harmed them, and then adopt either a forgiving stance or a grudge mode.
We've found in our research that people tend to report lower levels of fear and lower levels of sadness, and they feel more in control, and they feel some joy when they nurse a grudge compared to when they're ruminating about having been hurt. So early on, I think people can derive some sense of control or some sense of satisfaction in nursing a grudge. They become the powerful one. However, there's a boomerang effect, because physiologically it's very stressful to nurse a grudge. In fact, the physiological patterns are sort of equally bad for both ruminating about a hurt and for nursing a grudge, and significantly more stressful than when people cultivate empathy or engage in a forgiving response towards that person.
Sorry for the inconvenience.
What has research revealed about happiness, a basic emotion that seems to color every aspect of life?
We've always used the term subjective well-being because happiness means so many different things. In English, it could mean you're joyful, it could mean you're satisfied, it could mean the things that make you happy. And subjective well-being is a broader term which includes various types of things like positive emotions, feeling love and joy, not too many negative emotions like anger and sadness, lots of life satisfaction, engagement with the world, you're interested in what you're doing, meaning and purpose in life.
We're learning important things in the science of happiness. We're learning. That should make us worry, right? Number two, we think of certain factors in our life having important bearing upon our happiness. Things like financial well-being, job success.
This is not enough.
Those factors actually have relatively small effects, and what really matters is relationship well-being.
If you look at men versus women, in one study you'll find women are happier, but in the next study you may not. In one study you'll find young people are happier, in the next study you'll find old people are more satisfied with their lives, because all these differences are small and they seem to shift around.
And then in my own work in the field of emotion, what we're doing is taking that concept of happiness and starting to break it down into its more specific components, things like compassion or enthusiasm or gratitude. And the science of emotion will be advanced by a careful look at that part of our experience.
What I like is an approach in which we try to see what is life actually like. That is, what do people do with their time? That's the main question I want to ask. And do they use their time well? Do they enjoy it? Do they grow with it? Are they interested in what they're doing? To some extent, this really can be separated from the judgment that people have about their lives. So I'll give you an example. Americans are a lot more satisfied with their lives than the French are. I mean, it's about 40% of Americans say they're very satisfied with their lives, and about 12% of the French. And the Danes are the world champions, so 60% of the Danes say they're very satisfied with their lives. Now, it seems entirely possible that the French are less satisfied with their lives, but that they have better lives. We just don't know.
There aren't words for all of these emotions in every language. But if you think of emotions as being built around a theme, the theme is the product of our genes. That is universal. But the details of it are all filled in by culture and family upbringing.